West Bengal's economy didn't die, it was deliberately killed. No, seriously, how do you go from a state that contributes 30% of India's GDP at the time of independence to barely 5.6% today? How do you go from a capital city that used to look like this just 70 years ago to one that now looks like this? It sounds impossible today, but in 1947, West Bengal was already way ahead of most of India in its infrastructure and industrial sector. They already had massive industries, a world-class port in Calcutta, and extremely fertile land. If you are okay with mosquitoes and constantly being sweaty, this was the best place to run a business in India. But today, West Bengal is run by a party that behaves more like the mafia than a government. Hundreds of companies are leaving the state every year, and their population has grown way too lazy, receiving free handouts in exchange for votes. I really wanted to understand why Bengal was so powerful in the early 20th century and how they completely lost their way after independence. Spoiler alert, it's politics. But the politics of Bengal are anything but simple. Communist movements, insurgencies, wars, partition, colonial rule. The people of the state have suffered more than almost anywhere else in India, and Bengali politicians have never missed an opportunity to exploit them. So let me show you what happened to Bengal and why their story is the greatest economic failure of independent India. To understand how Bengal went from India's richest state to a struggling economic black hole, we need to start from the moment it all started going downhill. When India gained independence in 1947, while the rest of the nation celebrated, Bengal and Punjab were shattered by the partition. Not only did lakhs of Bengalis have to suddenly pack up everything and leave for one side or another, but in the short term, it created a huge problem for West Bengal's industries. You see, Bengal before independence was really self-sufficient. The eastern part of the region, today's Bangladesh, was mostly agrarian. They'd grow food crops, jute, bamboo, and raise animals. Western Bengal was much more industrialized. So they'd process all these raw materials into jute bags, rope, paper, and leather. And back then, these were massive industries, especially because of World War II. Now imagine owning a huge jute factory in West Bengal and overnight your entire supply of raw materials is cut off because some British guy drew a line on a map. That was the reality for lakhs of Bengalis on the Indian side of the border. Even though West Bengal eventually managed to start growing its own raw jute and bamboo, these industries never really bounced back to their pre-independence levels. But okay, that can still be fixed, right? India was a newly independent country and Bengal had tons of infrastructure ready to go. Sure, unless the central government decides to screw you over with their new freight equalization policy or the FEP. The government wanted to subsidize the cost of transporting raw materials like iron and coal so that states rich with natural resources didn't get an unfair advantage over other states, allowing all parts of India to industrialize equally. Now, this might sound great on paper, until you realize that industries naturally pop up in certain regions because of their inherent geographical advantages. Factories and heavy engineering facilities were starting to sprout in Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, and West Bengal because they had easy access to coal fields in the Chota Nagpur plateau and could quickly scale up operations because fuel was cheap. But this new policy completely eliminated that advantage. Now, if you're a businessman looking to open a factory, you would be more interested in states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, or Tamil Nadu, where you had bigger markets, more money, and more sophisticated seaports. So, if you think about it, the FEP had the opposite effect of what the government intended. It concentrated industrial growth in cities that already had industries and snatched away the opportunity from resource rich states. The immediate effect of this was deindustrialization. Factories shut down, jobs vanished into thin air, and the most capable and enterprising Bengalis left the state to go work in other parts of the country. It wouldn't be until 1993 that the FEP would be repealed, but by then it was too late. Richer states were now so far ahead that it would be impossible for the others to keep up. Okay, but even then, West Bengal was much more industrialized than most of India, so they still had an advantage. But that was quickly eroding year after year. It literally started on the night of Bengal's partition when the Union government slashed Bengal's share of income tax while increasing it for Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. And you know how India was infamously ruled by the license Raj, where every business needed half a dozen permissions and licenses from the government to simply contribute to the economy? Well, yet again, states like Maharashtra were given over 2,700 licenses in the 1950s and 60s, but West Bengal in the same period was given barely 1,600 licenses. Just think about that. Even if you had the money, the land, the infrastructure, the manpower, everything needed to start a business, the central government refused to let you do it. Anyway, now we're back in 1960s Bengal and things are not looking good. Unlike the India-Pakistan partition in Punjab, where the entire Hindu-Muslim population migrated in just a matter of days, in Bengal, the process was much slower and drawn out. East Bengalis were still migrating into West Bengal all the way up until 1971. Which meant West Bengal was constantly having communal tensions and the increased population was putting a real strain on the food supply. Large numbers of East Bengali refugees clustered in disease-ridden slums all around the perimeter of Kolkata, willing to do menial labor for dirt-cheap wages. Very soon, native West Bengalis found themselves unable to find decent jobs that paid a living wage. Organized crime soared as smugglers moved cattle, gold, and drugs between the India-Bangladesh border. You know what you get when you have prolonged periods of food shortages, economic stagnation, and low employment rates? An uprising. In the mountain town of Siliguri, a revolutionary movement was brewing. Inspired by the rise of Mao Zedong and his Chinese Communist Revolution, 3 Bengali men set out to lead their own revolution. In 1967, they incited a violent uprising among farmers in the village of Naxalbari. For years, wealthy landlords in the village called Jotedars had exploited farmers and laborers, demanding extortionate rents and threatening to evict them if they didn't pay. In fact, this was the problem all over West Bengal. Less than 5% of rich landlords owned more than 40% of the land, and the government hadn't bothered to redistribute excess land among the poor communities. Lower castes like Dalits were exploited and discriminated against. Tribal groups didn't have any rights over their lands, and many rural areas had almost no access to basic amenities like clean running water or electricity. People had had enough, and they wanted to take back control. Communism has this fascinating way of popping up in every society that's faced wealth inequality and food shortages, which makes sense. But it has an even more fascinating way of somehow always making a bad situation so much worse. The Naxalbari insurgents, now dubbed the Naxalites, quickly spread across West Bengal, setting fire to landlords' homes and getting into armed clashes with the police. And it wasn't just restricted to rural Bengal. With the stagnating economy and soaring unemployment, frustrated students in Calcutta abandoned their education to join the movement. By now, the Naxals were a full-on insurgency, targeting politicians, landlords, police, and businessmen for assassination. Calcutta in the early 1970s was a hotbed of Naxal activity, and there was a lingering sense of terror that they might strike at any time. The police in this period went on overdrive, routinely setting up fake encounters with Naxalites and shooting them down in the streets. It all came to a head in 1971 when the state and central government decided to put down the Naxalites with Operation Steeplechase, where 45,000 troops from the Indian Army and state police cracked down on Naxal strongholds all across West Bengal. They killed and captured hundreds of insurgents and effectively crippled the Naxals by arresting their senior leaders like Charu Majumdar. By the time peace had finally returned to West Bengal, the political instability had done more damage to the state's economic reputation than any central government policy ever could. But we're not done yet. While the Naxal insurgency didn't succeed in turning West Bengal into a Maoist utopia like they'd imagined, it did bring attention to a new political party, the Communist Party of India Marxist, or the CPM. These guys had actually managed to defeat Congress in the 1967 elections by forming a coalition, but they had too many internal struggles and failed to stay in power. But by 1977, things were very different, both in Bengal and in India as a whole. This was just after Indira Gandhi's emergency had ended, and Congress wasn't exactly winning any popularity contests at the moment, especially in West Bengal, because she was responsible for killing Maoist sympathizers. With everything that was going on in the country at that point, the entire state was gripped in a communist fever. And for Bengalis, this seemed like the perfect response to Indira Gandhi's dictatorial ambitions. The Communist Party of India won a landslide victory in the 1977 elections, forming the Left Front government under Chief Minister Jyoti Basu. This was the start of a new era for West Bengal, and I don't mean that in a good way. Here's the problem. The Left Front was great for rural Bengal. They decentralized state power and gave back a lot of autonomy to local panchayats and created land reforms that gave farmers more stability, protecting them from eviction by landlords. They were able to massively increase agricultural productivity in the 1980s, and they helped Bangladeshi refugees resettle in better living conditions than they previously had. Wait, so why did I say this was a problem? You see, when you're a communist, you're looking out for the little guy, so the big bad industrialists can all go to hell. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but that's kinda what happened. The Left Front rose to power on a campaign that promised to curb the monopoly of large corporations and instead encourage small-scale businesses and cottage industries. They were so militant about unionizing and protecting workers' rights that they invented a method of protest called gherao, in which workers would surround the offices of their employers, essentially bullying them into accepting their demands. Under their rule, West Bengal developed a culture of organized bandhs, where the entire state would go into a standstill as a form of protest. There was so much resources being redirected to the rural areas of the state that Bengal struggled to urbanize, creating a stagnant economy with infrastructure that remained years behind the rest of the country. The government got involved in every aspect of daily life, making it impossible to escape red tape and bureaucracy. Every little business or commercial activity required mountains of paperwork to acquire licenses and permits. This was License Raj in overdrive. The once thriving industries of West Bengal were slowly, deliberately strangled to death under the Left Front's rule. Big businesses found it impossible to operate in such a hostile environment and chose to set up shop elsewhere in India, taking their jobs with them. The jobs that did remain were low-skill, low-paying work in the unorganized sector, and even those would routinely be halted by one of the innumerable bandhs or strikes. West Bengal's share of India's industrial output dropped from 10.5% in 1977 to less than 4% in 2007. While Gujarat was investing 22,000 rupees per capita in industries in 1994, Bengal's investment was barely 4,000 rupees. But for the Left Front government, none of that really mattered. As long as they kept their rural population well fed and relatively happy, they had a guaranteed vote bank, one far larger than any urban population could match. For 34 years, no other party could match the popularity of the CPM and the Left Front. They became the longest ruling democratically elected communist government in the world. But even the CPM couldn't deny what was happening in West Bengal. Unemployment was reaching crisis levels by the 2000s, and industrial decay had corroded the economy so badly that even they had to take notice. They hastily tried to fix years of neglect by trying to attract investments from large corporations, which actually goes against everything they stood for. But they made two fatal miscalculations. The first was in 2007, when they tried to set up a special economic zone for a chemical processing plant. They tried to expropriate 10,000 acres of farmland in a town called Nandigram, but as usual, Maoists strongly opposed the government. A violent clash broke out between the villagers and the police, leaving 14 dead and 70 injured. Their second big blunder was in the very next year, when, yet again, the government tried to take over 1,000 acres of farmland near Singur for Tata Motors to build a car factory. The project saw immense backlash from local farmers, opposition parties, and environmental activists, to the point where even the Supreme Court declared the land acquisition illegal. So, yeah, after 3 decades of empowering Bengal's agrarian economy, championing communism and dismantling industries, CPM suddenly decided, you know what, we actually want industries to come back. Let's take away land from farmers and give it to billion-dollar companies. I'm sure our citizens will be okay with this. Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." For Bengal's opposition, these scandals were a gold mine and they took full advantage of it. They campaigned all across West Bengal, lambasting the state government for their betrayal of rural Bengalis and attempts to forcibly acquire land from unwilling farmers. At the head of this campaign was a fiery politician, Mamata Banerjee, who started the Save Farmland movement. She promised Bengalis that if she were elected to power, she would bring pariborton or transformation to the state. She promised that under no circumstances would her government ever try to take away land from citizens to build industries. The campaign was wildly successful. In 2011, after 34 years of TMC rule in the state, a new party rose to power, the Trinamool Congress, headed by Mamata Banerjee. A new era had yet again dawned on West Bengal. Or had it? I don't know if it's because Bengalis had already got too used to the idea of receiving free handouts or if TMC just decided that's the easiest way to secure votes. But the end result was that the new government went on a welfare overdrive. They began distributing frankly irresponsible amounts of food, subsidizing daily necessities, and even directly giving cash to women and farmers. They created what's known as a franchise model of government, where Mamata Banerjee holds central power, but she distributes political power among local leaders who are in charge of their specific region or area. All they have to do is ensure that political opposition is suppressed and that people vote for TMC. This is how Mamata's government created what's known as a syndicate Raj. Basically, those local leaders are more like powerful dons who control everything happening in their domain. Want to construct a building? You have to buy raw materials from syndicate-approved vendors. Starting a business? You need to hire local labor. Whatever they charge, you have to pay it, and if you don't, TMC goons would harass you to pay extortion money. Even the police were on their payroll, so if you got on their bad side, you were pretty much screwed. And this wasn't just for businesses, by the way. You had to bribe local syndicates just to join a college or get a job in the state government, even if you'd passed all the required exams. Recent investigations allege that even in hospitals, medical students and doctors were laundering kidneys, dead bodies, and medical supplies. The state is so hostile to businesses that ever since Mamata Banerjee rose to power in 2011, over 7,000 companies have abandoned West Bengal in favor of more friendly states. In 2014, the massive Narada sting operation led by investigative journalist Matthew Samuel exposed widespread corruption at practically every level of the Trinamool Congress government, right from the MPs to the state ministers. But the crazy part is that practically nothing happened. Aside from a handful of people getting arrested, the 2016 assembly elections took place like normal, and yet again, Mamata Banerjee and TMC won a comfortable majority. Now, obviously, a big part of this has to do with West Bengal's insane reliance on welfare schemes. If you can keep the population reasonably well fed and their pockets full, they'll never have a reason to vote for anyone else. But there's something else that's been going on in Bengal in recent times. Something that's gotten way worse in the last few years. Mamata Banerjee has been a vocal defender for the rights of Bangladeshi immigrants and refugees entering India. Despite several documented instances of illegal Bangladeshi immigrants entering the country, trying to falsely pose as Indian citizens, Mamata has called them a part of her family. But if you've seen Mamata from before her time as the chief minister, you'd know that there was a time when she passionately campaigned against the illegal infiltration of Bangladeshis into India. This isn't some obscure piece of news, by the way. She literally became infamous for throwing a stack of papers at the Speaker of the Lok Sabha in 2005. So, what changed? Investigations are ongoing, so none of this can be strictly confirmed. But authorities have alleged that TMC insiders are working with traffickers on both sides of the border to smuggle Bangladeshis into India, where they're given an entirely new identity, complete with an Aadhaar card, PAN card, and most importantly, a voter ID. Yeah, there's a very real possibility that Trinamool Congress is attempting to artificially inflate its voter base by allowing illegal immigrants into the country and setting them up with money, a new life, and a fresh identity.
It makes me so sad because Mamata Banerjee was once a politician who genuinely cared about the people of her state. But today, with pressure mounting from BJP and a very real chance that her reign will come to an end, Mamata Banerjee has decided that she'd rather betray her own citizens than give up her political power. And this is just a microcosm of the larger tragedy of West Bengal. The people entrusted with safeguarding it are the very ones who have profited the most from allowing it to decay and atrophy. And after all these years, you have to wonder, can West Bengal ever recover? Will we ever see Kolkata return to its place as one of India's greatest cities? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know this. It will never happen until the people of West Bengal realize this one simple thing. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
I've always thought that the lowest form of politics is when your entire objective for getting into office is to just stay in power, and you're willing to break every law and exploit every loophole just to get those votes and nothing else. It's like studying just to pass an exam, not actually learn anything. Except in this case, you're straight up cheating. That's basically what Pakistan did in 1971 when East Pakistan, what is now Bangladesh, won the national elections. Instead of allowing a Bengali man, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, to become the Prime Minister of Pakistan, they decided to invalidate the results of the election and invaded East Pakistan. In the months that followed, the violence and genocide of Bengalis became so horrendous that India was forced to intervene. The Indian Army, Navy, and Air Force had just 15 days to infiltrate East Pakistan, defeat the enemy forces, and free the new nation of Bangladesh from Pakistan. I've made a whole other video on India's incredible journey to victory in the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, which you can check out right here. Thanks so much for watching. Please support my channel by liking this video, get subscribed, and become a channel member to get early access to videos and exclusive content. It really helps me keep making videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.